This is a video tutorial of the vocabulary alignment service CultuurLINK. With CultuurLINK you can create links between your SCOS vocabulary, thesaurus, the term list, the word list, and the sources from the Dutch Cultural Heritage Hub. So in this case there are 4 sources: audiovisual, heritage, nature, and art and architecture. And in this tutorial we're going to focus on creating links between a term list from the Netherlands Institute for War Documentation and the audiovisual thesaurus from the Netherlands Institute for Sound and Vision. So I already prepared this a little bit. So the whole process takes up 4 steps. You upload your source, you select the target from the hub, you create your link strategy, and then you export your links. So in this tutorial we'll focus on creating the strategy. In other tutorials you can find information about the other steps. So what we see here in the strategy editor is basically 3 parts. So here, big in the middle, is the strategy canvas, and those contain blocks. In this case there are 2 blocks, and they're both data source blocks. So one contains the term list of the Netherlands Institute for War Documentation, and the other one contains the audiovisual thesaurus. On the left side you see the library of building blocks that we can drag into our strategy canvas like this, or we can remove building blocks. So there are various types of building blocks here. And at the bottom you find the data table, and the data table shows the results of a building block. So in this case we have selected the term list, and we can see here that there are 1343 concepts, and here we see those concepts. When we select the other block, there we see those concepts. You can scroll down and it will automatically update. So that's the data table. So what we're going to start with is inspect our 2 data sources, because we want to figure out what is the best approach, our best strategy to link these 2 sources together. And we can do this by looking at some of the statistics that are provided. So in this case we see an identifier as well as a SCOS preferred label. And this bar here indicates that 100% of the values have a preferred label. So that's good. We can use those for linking. We don't see the other columns, so we can open up the column editor to see what other information is available. And here we see all the attributes. In this case there is only one, so this means there is no alternative label available. But we do have relations, like the type, scheme, related, and narrower. So let's have a look at those. So those are added to the column, and you now see that 41% have SCOS related, and only 4% have narrower terms. So in this case there are no broader terms. Alright, that gives us some information about this term list. Let's have a look at the audiovisual thesaurus. This one is a lot bigger. It's almost a bit more than 175,000 concepts. We see here a preferred label, again 100%, 60% has scope nodes, and there are also some that have alternative labels. When we open the column editor here, there's a lot more things. There's a SCOS notation, there are even hidden labels, contributors, editorial information, which are typically not the things that we can use for linking. And also this one has related broader terms and also scheme information. So adding all this, you can see the hidden labels, the in-scheme information, related and broader. So 90% has a related term, 4%. When inspecting the data sources, we notice that the in-scheme column contains different types of values: person names, names, location names, etc. However, the term list only contains subject terms. It doesn't contain, for example, location names or person names. So it would not be a very good idea to match all to match these terms to all the terms from the audiovisual thesaurus, right? That will generate a lot of noise. So what we want to do is to filter this source. An easy way to do that is by first figuring out how to filter it, and we can check the distinct values that occur in this column. So contains about 8 concept schemes, and this is the one that we want to have. And this has a nice shortcut, so we can just say add it as a filter, and what happens is that we have a new block in a strategy editor. And this is a property object block. So the only thing that we still need to do is connect it to a data source block. And there we go. We only have 4,680 subject terms left. A different way of doing this is dragging the block directly from the library. So we open the filter source subsection, and here is the property object block. You see now that it's not configured by default. So what we need to do is to enter the information that we just got for free ourselves. So we want to have discuss in scheme property, and you notice that it gives out a completion of the namespaces that are available in the system, but you do have to know the name of the scheme. And in this way we also have the same thing. Now that we have our audiovisual thesaurus properly filtered to only the subject terms, we can try to create a mapping with our term list. The idea behind CultuurLINK is that you build up your strategy step by step. So you start with a simple type of mapping, see how good it is, and then determine how to continue to either improve your recall or to improve your precision. So there are various blocks available to create a mapping. You can use word overlap, you can compare strings, or you can use fuzzy string matching. And each of those blocks have different configurations in order to make them even more powerful. So we're going to start very simple. We're just going to take a string match block, we drag it in here, and we're going to connect it to our two data sources. Let me move this down a bit so we have a little bit more space for our strategy. So we connect the output of the term list to the first input, and we connect the output of the filtered list to the second input. You notice that the block is red. This means that it's not configured yet and no result can be computed. So to compute the result, we will configure it, and you see that the missing fields are marked red. So what we need to provide is the properties or the attributes that we're going to use to get our string. And as we saw when we were inspecting the data, that our data sources both had a preferred label. Typically the idea in a thesaurus is that the preferred labels are unique, so it's a good idea to start with this. We'll leave the other properties as the default. This means we'll just check if these strings are exactly the same. Alright, let's give it a go. And there we have 557 matches. So now let's switch to the data table and inspect those in a bit more detail. You can see that we have the different columns that we selected before, and instead of having only one term, we now have two. So in the first row you see the one from the National Institute for War Documentation, and then the second one from the Audiovisual Thesaurus. In the data table we can directly evaluate the links that we found. You can do that by clicking on a row. In this case we say it's correct, and if you click multiple times you toggle to the different types of link relations that are available. A different way to do it is just click on a button here and select it from the drop-down list. In this case it would be a bit too much work to evaluate all 557 matches, and we probably also don't need to do that because we used a very conservative match operation here, very simple. So we expect actually that most of the results will be good. So what we will do instead is to just take a small sample and evaluate that. And if all of those are good, then we are confident that we don't have to evaluate the rest. So we take a sample using a filter mapping block. So we drag the block in, we connect it to the result output, and there's our sample. In this case, it's actually set to 1000. That's not very useful. Let's set it a bit smaller, 50. So we get a random set of 50 matches, and let's evaluate those using the different values in the columns we have here, and of course the knowledge that you have as the owner of the vocabulary. And if they're really all good, then we can mark the final set as all good. We do that using the button here. So we can say mark this as final. In this case we say it's all exact match. You can choose a different relation from the drop down menu. With our simple mapping we managed to find 557 matches. But this is not all our source concepts. And as you noticed that these blocks not only consult a result output but also this not output. And here in the top of the data table you can select those outputs. Here we see our 786 concepts from our source vocabulary, term list, that we didn't manage to match. So let's try to find a few more. When we inspected the data source, the audiovisual thesaurus, we noticed that some of them have alternative labels. Let's see if we can find some matches with those. So we drag in our string match block again, connect it in the same way. And we configure it, but in this case we use the preferred label and the alternative label for the target. And now we find 138 matches. And as you can see here, the first match is found because the preferred label is not the same, but it actually is contained as one of the alternative labels. But what we also notice is that in some cases we actually find two concepts. So this one is matched against both of these because both have this alternative label. So what we can do is judge all of these manually, but we can also focus on the ones that actually have multiple concepts. So to help with that, we can actually filter our set using this ambiguity block. So if we drag it in here, connect it, and select it, then we now see that we have two outputs, ambiguous ones and unambiguous ones. There are 91 unambiguous one-to-one mappings, and there are 47 matches that have multiple results. So this is up to the vocabulary owner to judge which ones are good, right, by manually evaluating them. But notice that this is now a small. We managed to find some links by the overlap of the labels, and we did that by just checking if the labels were exactly the same. In some cases the labels are not exactly the same, but maybe almost the same. So let's try to find some links using almost similarity. And in this case I'm going to show you how to use stemming. So again we just use our string match block and we connect it in the same way as we did before. So to our source and to our filtered target. But we're going to configure it slightly different. We still use the prev label for the source because that's the only label we have. But for the target we're going to use RDFS label. And I might need to explain this a little bit. So we have used before the SCOS preferred label and the alternative label. And as you might know, that in the SCOS schema, both of these are defined as subproperties of RDFS label. So that means that if I select this one and I have this check mark enabled, then the system will use both of them. So now that I have set up the labels that we're going to use, I'm also going to go here more to the advanced options. So before we didn't use any stemming. That means that we're going to compare not the full word, but the stem of the word. So to enable this, I have to select the language that I want to use. So in this case, I use Dutch. Alright, let's give that a try. So I select the block, and I find 729 matches. Now, scrolling to this list, notice that one of these results was already evaluated before. And actually, I recognize one of these matches on the alternative labels as well. And these actually are not found by their stem. They're actually exactly the same, right? So they're also found by their stem. But these are the ones that we already found before. That's not really what I wanted. I just wanted to find some additional ones. So in order to do that, I have to change some of my wiring here. Because what I did now is that we're just looking in everything. But instead, what I want to have is I want to only consider the ones that I didn't match. So what I do, I disconnect it here, and I wire up my not from the first matcher up to the second one. Let's try that again. Alright. And the not from this one to our stand matcher. And now we have 34 matches left. And this looks a lot more like it. So these are actually found because the stem is different. Right, so now we can manually evaluate these or mark them directly as final. So let's try another type of matcher. So the string fuzzy match. Let's connect it in the same way again to the not and to the results of the audiovisual thesaurus. So again, we have the same type of configuration for the attributes that we're going to use. So we're going to use the preferred label and the RDFS label. And now we have different options here. So for now, I'll just leave them as default and let's see what happens. So we are going to compare the strings of all the concepts that we didn't manage to match yet. And we actually find quite some results. And the first one is quite interesting. So this is actually a compound that occurs in a sort of splitted form in the audiovisual thesaurus. Here's probably a stemming that didn't go right, but this one, that's probably not what we want. Neither this one. So here it gets even worse. So maybe we are a little bit too liberal in what we're allowing here. So let's change this and reduce the distance. So just let's set it to 1. And now instead of having 425 matches, we have 64 left, and we still have our right ones. This one is not really good. Let's mark that as bad. Neither is this one, and these are not good either. But this one is actually quite good. Again, a compound splitting, and in this case on the alternative label. So that's one that we want to have. So these are 64 matches. We managed to find links by comparing strings in all kinds of ways. But we still haven't found everything yet. So if you look at the not, then maybe this is not so surprising because the things that we see here are actually very war specific and they might not occur in the audiovisual thesaurus at all. Well, on the other hand, maybe some things we would expect there. What's happening here? So let's just do a manual search to see why we didn't manage to find this term. Hey, this one is actually here. Ah, check. It's in a different namespace or in a different concept scheme. So it turns out that what seems to be subject terms are actually classified as names of organizations of groups of people in audiovisual thesaurus. Okay, so we can do one other thing. we can add another source here. So let's take our source filter and use the names. So here we have almost 29,000 names, and let's use a string matcher to find those. So maybe in this case I'll just start here, and this one I can analyze later on what exactly I want to do. So use the referred label, maybe just start if it's label here, and I can even use stemming. Alright, 58 matches. Here's the one we're looking for, and some other ones as well. Some found by alternative labels. This doesn't look good. Diamonds, and this is actually a name. So maybe stemming is not such a good idea after all. Actually, for names, we don't really want to do stemming. So let's turn this off. So we lose a bit, but let's hope that improves the quality. Good. These were definitely some links we didn't want